I love it. All right, let's get into our Thursday Night Football fantasy takeaways. If you missed it, the Browns I certainly didn't miss it. The Browns beat the Jets 37-20 last night. The Joe Flacco experience continues. And some people, especially in Fantasy Championship Weekend, especially in Superflex leagues, that's great news. For other people, I won't name any names, but one of those happens to be his birthday today, and he's not on the show. Matthew Berry.
The man.
Dropped Joe Flacco, and he dropped Jerome Ford for his fantasy championship in our league that he's already angry about another situation. So
yeah,
this is a tough scene.
It was a tough scene. It was a great text thread of Matthew throwing the toys out the pram.
That's either going to be a championship move or a chump move.
Well, it's not off to a good start.
Man.
Yep,
He's punching air right now in that bunker.
Yep, just the 2 touchdowns and 57 yards for Jerome Ford
through
the air, and then he had it on the ground as well. I mean, I think the story of this, Connor, and I was texting backup producer Pete about this last night, and I don't think you guys have this expression in America, but it's like the Jets, they down tools. They down tools for the season. They put the tools down, they went home, and they just had nothing on defense.
Nothing. In a game where, and I guess we'll get to it in a second, they responded to the first touchdown. Trevor Siemian goes
unbelievable drive
right down the field against the Browns defense, which is regarded as one of the best defenses in the league under Jim Schwartz. And the Jets defense just had no response throughout the game. So for the Browns, they clinched their 3rd playoff berth since the 90s, since 1999, second in 4 years under Kevin Stefanski. Cleveland clinches the 1 seed if this week the Dolphins beat the Ravens, and next week the Browns beat the Bengals, the Bills beat the Dolphins, and the Steelers defeat the Ravens. So a lot needs to happen for them to get the 1 seed, but it's possible, as we show you the AFC playoff picture here. And I think more interestingly in this, Jay, because the 1 seed feels like a long shot, but good for the Browns and their fans who are riding high after last night's game in this wild season. Kevin Stefanski joined Paul Brown as the only head coach in Browns history with 10-plus wins in multiple seasons. I mean, this is somebody who is the favorite for Coach of the Year right now and maybe locked it up on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, I think this is a wrap. I don't see how Kevin Stefanski loses after this. The story of this season is so insane. They're the first team to ever start 4 different quarterbacks and make the playoffs. Not only that, but they've clinched with a week to go. They're 11-5, and it's not just the quarterbacks. They're missing their top 3 tackles. Not top 2, top 3 tackles. They're missing both their starting safeties. They're banged up on defense. Nick Chubb,
that's
might be
big
the
injury.
second best running back in the NFL. He went down in the first couple of weeks of the season, so I don't think there is any case against Kevin Stefanski. He had his crowning moment, his coronation last night in primetime. I understand that Dan Campbell with the Lions and their first division title in 30 years, Stike and McDaniel Ryans are all having great seasons as well, but I think this is Stefanski's. I think this is a wrap. I think minus 275 is value, honestly.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Dan Campbell in comparison, we're looking at it from that point where it's like, oh, the Lions haven't done this in so long, but last season for the Lions with Dan Campbell, like they were on the verge. This was a team that knocked Green Bay out the playoffs. Many people came into this season expecting the Lions to win this division. Now, the Browns, on the other hand, with Deshaun Watson, they were expected to be competitive. But many people thought it would be either the Ravens or the Bengals. Right. So now you eliminate the Deshaun Watson, the Nick Chubb, and like you say, missing the linemen and all these players. The defense is held strong, but they just figured out a way. And it's like when we had the screen up there earlier, there was 3 teams that clinched the playoffs: the Dolphins, Ravens, and Browns. That's crazy to see, knowing that the Chiefs and the Bills are out there and have not clinched. So to your point, Jay, I think he just locked it up.
Yeah, I think it's time. Just quickly on Dan Campbell. I think Dan Campbell's a really good coach. I think that if you want to have him top 3, top 5 for Coach of the Year, that's absolutely fine. But his case for Coach of the Year is that the Lions sucked for the 28 years before he got there.
Right.
Like, he doesn't have anything to do with the fact that the Lions were terrible before he got there. And yes, he's built this program up and he's done a great job. But for me, that his season this year, this is linear improvement for the Lions. They won 9 games and now they're probably going to win 12.
Right, I think that's the key there, Jay, is that if you say Dan Campbell's the Coach of the Year, you're rewarding a rebuild. That's an amazing rebuild. When he got there to the Lions, I mean, it felt like they were hopeless. Obviously, there's been so much wrong for them for a long time. What him and Brad Holmes have done to rebuild them over a stretch of years is great. If you look at Coach of the Year as what happened this season, and you think of adversity and adjusting and all of those things, Kevin Stefanski is the absolute model of that with the adjustments they've had to make. And those adjustments they've had to make have been on the back, literally, of Joe Flacco. And another wild game for Joe Flacco. I think the Jets hadn't allowed a 300-yard passer in like over 30 games. Obviously, Joe Flacco's the guy to break that. And we got to hear from Flacco after the game on the crowd chanting his name.
Yeah, I heard him a little bit, yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, just put yourself in that position. I mean, you can't deny it. It's I said it from the very beginning. I mean, the city's been unbelievable. My teammates have been unbelievable, like in terms of just embracing me onto this football team. So it's all been great, and it makes it that much more special to be able to come in here and play some good football.
4 straight games for Joe Flacco of 300-plus passing yards last night, 3 touchdowns. As he does, Lawrence, he throws a pick. We were joking off air that it could have been 3 more.
Could have been.
But Flacco's going to keep ripping that thing, man. He's letting it go.
He has an incredible skill of, throwing some supposed to be interceptions, like they go in your hands and you just drop it. But, man, hats off to this dude, man. He has, closed the gap drastically for comeback player of the year. And what I was going to say also, too, is I expected these Browns to have these results, but with Nick Chubb and Deshaun Watson and other guys healthy. So for them to have a guy in Joe Flacco who wasn't getting who the phone wasn't ringing for the guy, to have him here, he's now in the playoffs now, 4th straight game with 300 passing yards. In his 5 games, he's averaged 323 passing yards. Look at him dropping it in the bucket right there. He's doing the playoffs. He's even being a little mobile. He being a little old man mobile too. Last night
right here.
This is the play right here. He gets hit in the face. Quentin Williams chasing him down. He hits Jerome Ford, who Matthew Berry benched in his fantasy league.
Dropped him, Lawrence.
You gotta
Didn't
make
even
those
want him on the
tackles.
roster.
Yeah, didn't even want him on it, and there he goes. But yeah, man, Flacco, 13 touchdown passes and 4 starts, man. So, we talked about him on Wednesday as closing it out on the, on the tab against this Jets defense, man. But he, after this, I don't know if we could keep betting against him until the playoffs.
Yeah.
Until the playoffs.
The thing with Flacco is I think he's like the chaos agent that is a very good fit for this team because their defense is so good. You want to ride that high variance of a guy who will put up points. He'll also put up turnovers. And last night, it kind of gets a little bit lost in the wash that he threw a terrible pick 6. He fumbled twice, and he could have thrown 3 or 4 more picks. But I think he is overall, you take it all together, he is playing at a much, much higher level than anticipated. And he clearly has connections with all of these receivers.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, Jay. Has the pendulum swung too far the other way as we sit here and celebrate Joe Flacco? And well earned. I mean, it's one of the best stories in the NFL right now. Off the couch, a guy that really couldn't get teams to return his calls. Do you think that here we go with some of the questionable Flacco? Do you think it started to swing too far the other way that, I mean, he's right up against Damar Hamlin for comeback player of the year. Is that an overcorrection at this point?
I think it is. And look, there's a couple of things. One, I can't believe that wasn't picked. One is that with Damar Hamlin, people are looking at his comeback player of the year case through the lens of, well, he's only played a handful of games and a handful of snaps. He hasn't produced on the field relative to these other candidates. I'm sorry, that's just the wrong lens through which to view his case. He literally died on the field, and he's come back to play the sport that killed him. Like, it's insane. It's one of the greatest comeback stories in the history of sports, and I get that he hasn't, he's not Kyle Hamilton out there, but the fact that he has taken a single snap, to me, that should clinch the award for him. But the thing with Flacco as well, I get that Hamlin is a strange case and Flacco is a strange case. Let's just compare Joe Flacco to Baker Mayfield. Like, Flacco has played 5 games, Mayfield has played 15. Flacco has 13 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Mayfield has the same number of interceptions at 8. And he has twice his touchdowns, he has twice his wins, he can clinch the division this week. I just don't understand. I get that it's an amazing story, what Flacco has achieved for this Browns team, but like, how do you vote him over even Baker Mayfield when Mayfield has been there the whole season and played at a higher level?
I would say this. We're talking about the award comeback player. Like, Joe Flacco is a player. You mentioned something about Damar Hamlin snaps, and it is an incredibly low percentage. So it's more like, it is more story. Like, I think the odds are how they are right now. If that crazy scenario happens where the Browns end up with this 1 seed,
Sure,
he is winning that award.
Right.
And I kind of look back at Alex Smith when he came back. He didn't die on the field, but his leg did. He came back, and the team was dependent upon him for a certain amount of games. Like, he was their starting quarterback. So, and he had a game where he threw for 390 yards. So, for me, looking at the odds at how they are now, I would actually put something on Joe Flacco. I would feel like that's the best value of the three. Just because Baker, he's about to win the division, but it's the weakest division. Although they have separated, we couldn't figure out which NFC South team was the best. I think it's clear that it's the Bucs right now, but they still have to win it. But if Joe Flacco gets that 1 seed, man, we're talking about something.
I think if Flacco gets the 1 seed, then I think it's probably a different scenario. But the thing is that they're about 40-1 to get the 1 seed, and he's plus 100 to win the award. So I think that ultimately what it comes down to me, Flacco is very similar to Brock Purdy's offensive rookie of the year case last year, where Purdy came in 6 games, Mr. Irrelevant, goes 6-0. But he didn't factor into the award because he played so few games.
Right.
And I think the only way you can win this award playing 5 games is if you literally came back from the dead. And otherwise, I think the Flacco will just get compared to Mayfield and the other candidates like Stafford and Tua to a lesser extent. And ultimately, I don't think he's going to win.
Someone that would vote for him, though, is his teammate David Njoku, who had 6 catches for 134 yards. It felt like all of that was in the first quarter last night. I know Sauce Gardner covered him in the second half, and it didn't happen after that. I think when you look at Njoku right now, guys, this is someone who he's always had the talent. He's a first-round pick. He's a great player, always fantasy relevant. But no Amari Cooper last night, and even when Cooper plays, Flacco is keying in on Njoku and making him an even bigger part of this offense.
I mean, he just looks like an absolute monster. Like, this guy is going to be, I think, a top 5 tight end in drafts next season. And when you think about just the dearth of elite tight ends in fantasy, Njoku has really thrust himself into that conversation. And look, this Jets defense is not what the Jets defense was all season, but still the ability to do what he did bodes incredibly well. There aren't many tight ends with his ceiling.
Yeah, last 4 weeks with Flacco starting, averaging 21 points per game, those are unheard of numbers for tight ends in fantasy. 100 yards in 2 of his last 3 games. So, and we kind of figured this would be the case without Cooper. But like you said, even with Cooper, that's been their number 2 guy.
Good call from Matthew. He had Njoku over receiving yards as his best bet yesterday. And a great call from Jay, who had Myles Garrett to get a sack on Thursday Night Football as his best bet. Myles Garrett finishes with 6 quarterback pressures on top of the sack. An interesting number, not interesting, just an eye-popping number from Next Gen Stats. Myles Garrett recorded all 6 of his pressures against Mekhi Becton in under 2.5 seconds last night. Garrett is one of 2 pass rushers to generate over 40 quick pressures this season. He has 54. Micah Parsons is the other one with 60. We have a theme going, recapping this game, Jay, of awards being wrapped up. We talked about Stefanski Coach of the Year. We got a little bit into the more debatable one of Comeback Player of the Year. Feels like Myles Garrett is leaning towards wrapping up Defensive Player of the Year. And we've been on this for a while. The Micah Parsons hype over him always felt a little off base, especially factoring in the pricing that Myles Garrett had a game against the Jets offensive line left.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of a strange one because Garrett, he has 14 sacks. That is not usually the same amount that a Defensive Player of the Year edge rusher will get. But I think there is now just the acknowledgement of what he does just beyond his sack numbers, the amount of attention that he gets. Did Becton have 4 penalties last night just purely because he was scared of Myles Garrett?
He kept trying to get off the ball early, false start after false start.
And he was doing it more often.
He had
didn't
to
get caught sometimes.
Right, 100%.
Garrett's bend, the way that he was able to get so low, and Becton just couldn't get that low. It was insane. So I think that Garrett, I don't think it's a wrap the same way that Stefanski is a wrap for Coach of the Year, but I do think there is still some meat on the bone at minus 235. I think that should be more like minus 300, minus 350. Just because if Parsons goes off tomorrow night and has like 3 sacks against the Cowboys, against the Lions, then I think it's a discussion again if TJ Watt gets the 22 sacks or something. But ultimately, I think the most likely outcome is that the award was won last night.
In this era, too, Lawrence, of advanced stats, and they're not that advanced, but just pressures and quarterback hits being registered just as much as sacks, I think that's where Watt has lost his case because he always has the eye-popping sack numbers, but the snap-by-snap dominance has been ruled by Garrett and to a lesser extent Parsons.
Right, and just when you look at these sack numbers, like you look at a team like the Ravens who lead the league in sacks, but there's no one single pass rusher that you think like, oh, man, like it's a collective group,
Right.
So it's not really always about the numbers. The Ravens don't get as much pressure as you would think from a team who leads the league in sacks. So talking about Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, this is the year where Watt, it's more just like it statistically looks good. It's like the quarterback conversation. Like we got Lamar at the top right now, and he doesn't have 20 touchdown passes yet, but there's a slew of other quarterbacks that do. When you look at them play, you take into account the penalties, you take into account how it's affecting the defense as a whole. So I think it seems like that's coming into play, for more than one position. And, Defensive Player of the Year is one of those.
All right, as we close out our recap here, a quick note on the Jets, because there's not a lot on the Jets in this one.
How was last night? How was the vibe?
Oh, it was great. After watching that, you get in at 3 a.m., you take the dog out, you go to sleep for 2 hours, everything's fine.
The problem was that it was semi a game in the second half. Cleveland couldn't do anything in the second half on offense.
It was very odd how Cleveland's defense, too, it was very Jetsian of them to not be themselves against Trevor Siemian for a little bit of that game as well. I mean, the Abanikanda kick return fumble also set it back the other way. It was a mess of a game.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.